Good morning. Welcome to our first expert panel of this morning's conference. This session is Developing and Sustaining Creative Economies in Small and Mid-Sized Communities. I'm pleased to introduce our three panelists this morning. First, Bill Dotzler, Iowa State Senator and Chair of the Economic Development Subcommittee. Andrey Petrov, Assistant Professor of Geography here at the University of Northern Iowa. And Jim Walsh, CEO of JSA Development in Waterloo. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a little more lengthy introduction to themselves and give us some initial thoughts on developing and sustaining creative economies. Mr. Dotzler.
Oh, I get to go first. All right, that's great. Thank you for attending this, and I'm pretty excited that we're really talking about creative economies because my experience in the Iowa legislature, I've had the opportunity to learn from CEOs and business people over my last 17 years of office. I'm heading into my 18th year. I've always been on the Economic Development Appropriations Subcommittee, which I'm now chair of, and then always have been on the Economic Development Standing Committee, which deals with all the issues. Also on Business and Labor Committee, and I am an assistant majority leader in the Iowa Senate. In the Iowa Senate, the Democrats have a one-person majority, so it's 26 to 24. And my experience with the creative economy really kind of started when I was in college. I was here at this university. I went to community college first, and I was just speaking just a little bit earlier before we came in here with Andrey and told him I really learned about the creative economy through partying, kind of, hanging out and having fun. And that's a real key thing to driving the creative economy because I truly believe that talented people can go anywhere. And they will go anywhere, but they want to associate with a hip and happening, cool place to call themselves home. And if our communities don't have the kind of amenities, the kind of things that stimulate creative people, you're not going to get it. And so my role in the Iowa legislature has been working to try to provide the type of things that talented, creative people are gravitating towards. And my experience is if you have talented, creative people and a skilled workforce in that area that locate because of location, it's a cool place, businesses will follow, and if you have enough critical mass, those creative people interact in the pubs and restaurants and venues and festivals and interact and exchange ideas. And the exchanging of ideas is really, I think, the mother of invention in today's economy. That listening to their business community, they really talk about, especially in the area of chemistry, for example, we really understand chemistry and we understand how the molecular structure works and how certain elements relate to each other. But what we need in the chemistry industry, from like DuPont said, is we want people that can take existing technologies and ideas and create something new from it and interact them in new ways. So taking that as a foundation of why we should do these types of things, my time in the Iowa legislature has been really focusing on trying to create synergy in communities. And when I was in the Iowa House and then in the Iowa Senate, I had an opportunity to hear from a professor that at one time was a Harvard economist, and he studied what made a real difference on communities that succeed and those that don't. And he wrote the book, Rise of the Creative Class, and that was Richard Florida, and a lot of you probably have heard of him. And one of the things that we tried to do in the Iowa legislature was try to create a heart and synergy within your communities and created cultural and entertainment districts. So communities could focus on one area to try to develop a critical mass. And with our theme of about creating economies in small, mid-sized communities, Main Street communities can focus on trying to put amenities, art, cultural type things, events. Historic preservation is something that I've worked on. I've taken that program from $2.5 million up to $50 million. During the recession, we had to go back a little bit, 10%. In the last session, we passed legislation that improved it to $50 million a year, plus another 5 for the next 3 years, and was vetoed by the governor, unfortunately. I don't know if he'd do that the next time. We also worked on community attraction and tourism programs, and another program that we created for Cedar Rapids, who came to the Iowa legislature in 2007 and said, we're hearing from our corporations, particularly Collins, and they're telling us that we need something that will turn our community around and make it the kind of thing that young people really want to work at and spend their time in. And they want more downtown apartments. They need more river walk and access to the river. And we created a program specifically with Cedar Rapids in mind, but our own community here, Waterloo, Cedar Falls, called River Enhancement and Community Attraction and Tourism, and put $40 million into a fund. Unfortunately, in 2008, the floods hit, and that money had been scooped, and we didn't get an opportunity to get that back until just this last session. We put another $1 million for city planning of river attractions, and unfortunately, that was vetoed also. So, working on historic preservation, putting cultural events and creating a center through community attraction and tourism programs, trying to focus on cultural and entertainment districts and arts and culture. I also sit as the chair of the Department of Cultural Affairs and trying to put more resources out to our community, all contribute to what I call part of the war for talent, of trying to be competitive with other states. Because one of the things that we have found out, and the Iowa Business Council has really helped champion this, is some of the research that's coming out there that says even if every student from University of Northern Iowa and Iowa State and our surrounding colleges and community colleges stay in Iowa, we're still going to find that we're going to have a shortfall of skilled and talented workers because we have so many baby boomers, which I'm one, that are going to leave the workforce. And our economy right now is being stagnated because of lack of those skill sets. They have just some of the most recent information that's been put out shows that we are short right now, if we could have the workers, 7,000 to 10,000 individuals and jobs would be created immediately in Iowa if we had those talented creative workers. So I could go on forever. I got my pretty much 10 minutes in, so I'm going to pass this off to whoever's next.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I guess I start quickly by talking about my background. I did my PhD at the University of Toronto, and I'm glad that Richard's name has already been mentioned. So Richard Florida's Martin Prosperity Institute now is located at the University of Toronto. So when I was a student, he wasn't yet there. I worked with some of his colleagues, but now, of course, I'm kind of part of the institute myself. So we a little bit work with Richard as well. So my research is in remote and rural areas, looking at knowledge economy and creative capital in those communities. What I'm going to be talking today is more of a micropolitan areas, which are communities with 15 and 10,000 people. So it's really not Waterloo. So a little bit level down, which we, of course, we have a lot of those communities in Iowa as well. And my other research, of course, in Canada. But the first thing I guess I would like to say as an academic is that we in the academic world basically neglect all non-metropolitan regions from thorough analysis acceptance of creative capital, creative class, knowledge economy issues. And the reason is, of course, that there is so much of it in large cities, and that's where the focus is. It's where Florida, himself, Richard Florida, has been working for decades. And of course, even in his newest edition of his book that you mentioned, there's no mention of non-metropolitan communities. So that, of course, gives an impression that there is not much to look at in terms of creativity and creative class in smaller cities, which, of course, is not the case. But secondly, and maybe more unfortunately, it gives the impression to those who live or who administer those communities that they either should forget about creative economy or they should implement those prescriptions to how to foster creative economy taken from metropolitan areas. That's, for example, what Richard Florida's Institute is giving. And both, of course, are not correct, right? Because as we learn about creative economy in smaller cities, we see that there are some things that are fairly similar to what we find in large cities, but there are very many other things which these smaller communities can dwell on to succeed in creative economy that are not present in large cities, which I might mention in a few minutes. So my personal quest was to sort of bring in peripheral areas, rural areas, small towns into the scope of creative capital and knowledge economy research. That's what I do. Now, if we start talking about creative economy, of course, it's already been said. What's it Florida called Florida dictum? What his cousin says. Well, in modern economies, a knowledge-based economy, right? The places that succeed should be doing well in knowledge production. In order to do well in knowledge production, you need to have human capital. Specifically, you need to have creative capital, the people who produce meaningful new forms that have economic value. That's the definition of creative capital, so that we all know what we're talking about. But in order to do that, in order to have these people in, you have to have a quality of place that attracts them. And what are the primary ingredients of the quality of place is its tolerance, meaning that there is a low barriers of entry for a variety of things you could do. There is also feeling that of acceptance of new ideas and novelty, right? So things like that, so that make this place attractive for creative individuals. So if you succeed in attracting them, then everything will fall into place. That's what the Florida dictum says. And that's what's been widely applied across a variety of metropolitan areas who have their development plans specifically designed to follow this formula. Attract creative people, use that to build a creative knowledge economy and be competitive and succeed as a place. So that's the idea. Now, how do we, or can we, apply any of that to smaller places? Well, I guess I could quickly show you this. This is the thesis wrote by my students, and it's about creative economy in the rural Midwest. So I guess we could something, right? If there is 150 pages to write about.
I don't think you got time for that. Really,
no.
150 pages.
But the couple of things that maybe I should mention is, first of all, that as I said, a lot of same patterns that we observed in metropolitan areas are still fulfilled. Yes, you need to be an attractive community. You need to have certain ingredients that bring people in. An important component, I think, that we need to keep in mind is that creative capital is not sort of uniform body of people. There are different professions, different occupations that come into it. Right? From traditionally, we think of creative capital, Richard Florida would think creative capital is the technology workers, right, who work in knowledge production in the field of technology. But of course, there are other types of creativity, and when we go to communities, smaller communities, it becomes even more important. For example, entrepreneurial creativity. It is a form of creativity. If you look at definition, producing meaningful new forms that have economic value, entrepreneurs is a very important component of creative capital. So not only attracting technology workers, we also attracting entrepreneurs, right? And of course, the artist, the bohemian, but in the terminology of traditional creative capital research. So those who participate in cultural economy, these groups are highly intertwined. So when we look at successful communities, we see that all of them come together. So it's a synergy that must be built. You can't just pour everything into one and be successful. If you pour money into bohemian components, we would expect that others would follow, right? And that will give you success, not just one. So that's important to think of self-reinforcement mechanism, I guess, between different groups of creative capital. That's very important. And that's what we see in metropolitan areas too. The biggest distinction that we find, I think, with the smaller cities and smaller communities is that the traditional deterrents, I guess, or traditional impediments to creative capital growth that we find in metropolitan areas, such as strong social capital, for example. Traditionally, we as scientists say, oh my God, if you have strong capital, strong social capital means that people so closely connected, it's very difficult to innovate. That's been considered a problem. We find that in smaller cities, actually the opposite is the case. So it's not only synergy within components of creative capital, but also between creative capital, social capital, and civic capital. And that is the primary, I think, difference between large cities and small cities, because in large cities it's much more difficult to build creative social capital. But if your social capital is assisting you in attracting and retaining creative labor force, that, of course, what smaller cities have as an advantage compared to metropolitan. That's what we can actually dwell on and be more successful than our larger counterparts. I think that's very important to realize. The question is how we properly do that. And of course, there are examples of successful communities. I mean, I don't have time for it, but my own students analyze Pella and Tuscaloosa, I think, as successful communities. And they're very different paths. They're very different successes. But both of them illustrate that notion that I mentioned, that the synergy between traditionally strong endowments of small cities like community and civic social capital, and how they can be deployed to succeed in creative economy. So there are a variety of other things. Of course, we need to remember as well, I guess my last thought will be, which is especially crystal clear to me in my more remote areas, I study northern Canada and Arctic regions, is that creative capital, maybe we can argue that creative capital is more important for economic success of these regions than metropolitan areas. Because even individual innovator, even in the small group, even in the fairly limited number of innovators present in the community, could deliver really dramatic economic return because the economy is small, right? So the impact of each individual creative worker, creative business is even higher than it would be in the large city. So in that sense, we of course need to think of creative economies even more important in those communities than maybe in the city. Kind of controversial statement, but that's we could say that. And another layer of that is very interesting too. To be creative in a smaller community, you have to be, so the degree of creativity could have been even higher. You might have, you might have to have more creative ways in which you operate as opposed to this big city where they have all these things kind of fall into place. Even to get credit to do any of the, from the bank, it could be a challenge, right? So the degree, I guess, if you measure the degree of creativity you need to possess to succeed as an entrepreneur, as a technology worker, any other type of creative occupation person in a smaller place could be higher. So we really need to foster those people, and if we have them, we need to appreciate them maybe more than the ones we find in big cities. So that's kind of a few thoughts that I guess.
That's good.
Good morning. I'm Jim Walsh. I'm currently the CEO of an entity called JSA Development. We have 30 plus properties in and around downtown Waterloo. I guess after listening to the academic and the legislative side, we're the bleeding edge of this idea of cultural economy. Waterloo has traditionally been a manufacturing, meatpacking, railroad, blue-collar town. We're now in an era when most of those have gone away, one way or the other. We do still, of course, have some meatpacking, we still have some railroads, and we still have a major manufacturing facility in town, but they are much less in proportion to what they used to be. The folks who came to Waterloo and made Waterloo grow after the prairie westward movement settled down a bit were all brought here by those industries. They were attracted by industries which largely don't exist anymore in numbers that could support a town the size that Waterloo was. So we face a prospect of finding something new and different and perhaps better than what we had before, but it's a struggle to find it. And Waterloo is a good example. It's a bigger town than what Andrey was talking about. It's 65,000 population. And of course, we're right next to Cedar Falls here, which is another 35,000. Altogether, we think we have a market area in the county of about 135,000 people. That's not Minneapolis. That's not Chicago. That's not San Francisco. We get people who come back to our city all the time and say, why don't you have this? Why don't you have that? Well, you should get this great big thing. You should get that great big thing. Well, the concept of appropriate scale is critical to trying to develop an economy in any size town. Andrey was just talking about these smaller towns and the need for scalability and the need for synergy between things. You can't have all of one thing, can't have all another. Well, in downtown Waterloo, we have people always talking about why don't we have more retail stores. We can't have retail stores until you have customers. You open a very nice Abercrombie branch down in downtown Waterloo, it'll be out of business in 6 weeks. You can't put those things where people aren't at. And it's not a shopping center, and even the shopping centers don't last long anymore. They've got their own problems. But I guess my point is, from the bleeding edge of the cultural economy, is that it's a slow process. It's a process that has to build on, I think, what Bill called fun. We need to have a downtown that's interesting. I have 3 grown daughters now, all with advanced degrees, all of whom left town. And to me, that's a crisis. I don't know how your parents would feel about it if you decide, well, I can't live in the town that my parents live in anymore. I have to go someplace else to find enrichment, to find the employment I want, or to find a life for myself. It's not right. We've got to fix it. So we're trying. And I did recently have one move back after 4 years in Chicago. And she's a structural engineer and had to take a substantial pay cut to come back here, but she wanted to be closer to home, and I think she was somewhat enhanced or attracted back by the fact that we do have some things happening. This university is a big part of our culture in the Cedar Valley, and my wife teaches here in psychology. That's how I ended up here. I came here in 1975, and I was only going to be here a year or two. I'm still here. That's what happens to folks. A place that they go for a little while becomes home. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's necessary for us to find exciting cultural experience for our children so that they don't feel they have to go somewhere else. They go for a while, they might stay. So we need to try and prevent that. But the academic part of this, I'll leave to other people, but we have creative stuff going on in our central business district in Waterloo, and we have cultural things going on. I won't try and differentiate between the two. To me, they're all the same. We've got the major TV station in town is in downtown Waterloo. We have several radio stations. We've got a newspaper, the main newspaper in town. We've got music. We've got advertising. We've got performing arts. All of the things that you think of in communicating things to audiences, we've got down there. We've got cultural things. We've got scientists, engineers. All the major engineering firms are represented in downtown Waterloo. All the major architecture firms are represented in downtown Waterloo. We've got entertainment, museums, some theater. I admit it's one that shows movies that probably won't go with the family. We've got 2 strip clubs too, so we've got culture downtown. But these are leisure time activities that have become a small part of our downtown, but they're still there, and I don't feel threatened by them. I don't think that people who accept culture for being a mixed bag should feel threatened by it. We have lots of things that you can't find elsewhere in the community, and some that you don't want to find elsewhere in the community. We've got the Waterloo Center for the Arts. All this is all within 5 or 6 block range. The Center for the Arts. We've got the community theater associated with that. We've got Young Arena down there. We've got a children's entertainment museum. We've got an art plaza down there. Where we've got an expo. We've got 3 museums. We've got something called an Imaginarium, which you take your children to, and they do things for a few hours to give you a break. We've got 2 historical districts, certified historical districts, east side and west side of Waterloo, with dozens of historically interesting and architecturally interesting buildings. Thanks to the legislature and Mr. Dotzler, those have been saved from the brink of disaster with historic tax credits. We still have probably a third of the buildings in downtown Waterloo that are empty above the ground level because of various economic reasons. The buildings were allowed to become obsolescent starting around 1960 and up till now. I recently renovated a building downtown that had been empty upstairs for 55 years. Nobody had ever been in there. It just was like something you'd see on Raiders of the Lost Ark. You had to cut your way through cobwebs, and nobody had ever used it. Well, it was perfectly usable if somebody had kept it up, but economic obsolescence, and don't get me preaching on urban sprawl, but that's a big part of it too. And if any of you folks are local, talk to your local city councils about their continued spread southward, which is going to affect your downtown districts and your existing business districts if you let it continue. That's what happened in downtown Waterloo, incidentally. Everybody moved out to the suburbs, and they left the downtown empty, and then 40, 50 years later, they said, oh my God, what happened here? Well, what happened is everybody moved, and they did it because of attractive things that the local government made available to them at the edge of town that they wouldn't do in the downtown. Well, we're starting to fix that now. Anyway, back to my list, we've got I said the architects and the engineers are coming back. We've got computer companies, design companies downtown. We've got every kind of bar and club you can imagine. We've got Bosnian bars, we've got Mexican bars, we've got black bars, white bars, Irish bars, German bars, we've got old guy bars, we've got 70s bars, we've got gay bars, we've got Bosnian bars. They don't do well next to each other. But we've got all sorts of places where people can go after work and visit with each other and informally trade ideas or stories, or just see each other and know that they are together working in an economy. They can make a living down there, and they can have a life down there. We have an increasing number of residential facilities downtown, and we have them for all income levels. We have some that are low income, some that are fancier, and some that are very fancy. We're trying to create a atmosphere where everybody can find a place to live, and it's an interesting place. JSA Development does not build boxes. We take old buildings, turn them into nice modern apartments, washer dryers, granite countertops, high ceilings that were easily incorporated into these older buildings and become interesting places to live with skylights, outside decks, roof decks. We try and make it not just possible but attractive for people to live near where they work in a place that wasn't just put up a couple weeks ago with Chinese gypsum board. This is a way that people can feel their history. So we try to do that down there. We got the pawn shops, we've got churches and storefront churches. I don't know if that's part of a cultural economy or not, but they're there. People come to it. We've got a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting place down there if you're so inclined. It fits right in with all the ours, I guess, I don't know. But we've got some public art down there. We're about to have a new dog park downtown. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the old manufacturing, meat packing, blue collar downtown Waterloo. Like I said, we're at the bleeding edge of this cultural economy. You know, the old Army slogan when you're trying to recruit people, be all that you can be. Well, that's kind of the way I'm approaching Waterloo. It needs to be all that it can be. And we got to be careful not to try to be something we can't be. And we need to be sure that what we do is successful and that people feel they're safe and can have fun down there. So from our perspective, the cultural economy is important. We are a culture and entertainment district. We appreciate the support from the legislature that they've given to help these older areas of town become productive, become part of the successful Iowa economy. We're trying to make a place where people can come back to work. We bring them back and we'll find a place for them to work and a place to house them. And we appreciate the research that shows that this does work. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. First, any follow-up comments from?
I appreciated what Andrey was saying because in my personal experiences, it really hits home. He talked about Oskaloosa and Pella, and every summer I ride RAGBRAI, and I think most of the people know what RAGBRAI is. It's the Register's Great Bike Ride Across Iowa. This year was my 30th year in a row, and I had an opportunity to hit about every town in Iowa multiple times, and this year we have to go through Pella and Oskaloosa. And the Pella has really kind of reinvented itself in a way with their Dutch heritage and put in this new windmill and, you know, actually an actual working windmill that they purchased for multiple millions of dollars from Holland. And they're really playing off their culture, and I've seen that downtown, you know, kind of really change. Oskaloosa's got things going on. I talked about Cedar Rapids briefly at the start about how they needed to reinvent themselves, and with the river enhancement dollars being scooped and not really being available. Well, with the flood happened, things changed, you know, for Cedar Rapids in a way. And out of it evolved an area, and the Bohemian area down there, they call it the Nouveau Market, And that is an entrepreneurial market that allows young professionals who are working at startup businesses and creative economy stuff, from food to arts and whatever, to really kind of test their market and their products. And around this area, now they're taking some of the old, flooded out, historic, older buildings, and they're doing what Jim Walsh is doing and making sure that there's apartments available upstairs, you know, business startups downstairs. Those kind of things are a secret to developing any community, whether they're small or large. And, you know, Richard Florida always preached, you have to have people living in high density areas to really create this critical mass. And you know, you really don't know what it is till you see it and feel it. And that's kind of what's happening downtown in Des Moines. Even though it's a large city, there are individual communities with every large city. And the East Village has become an area where we're seeing tremendous development over the last 10 years, where they had a whole bunch of buildings that had no value to them. And because of the right kind of incentives to help get this stuff started and increasing property values, all those projects work. In smaller communities, one of the real difficulties is finding the capital to be able to develop an older building, to be able to do what needs to be done, to renovate it, to put the flats up above. And that's why state incentives are important. We have the historic tax credit program, so a building that's on this historic registry or is deemed that can get incentive money almost up to 50% of the cost of revamping the building. Brownfields, gray fields, which is polluted areas, and gray fields being gray-headed, older buildings, and having additional incentives that would help developers like Jim because the buildings really don't cash flow unless the state's willing to invest. Once you start having enough of that, and you target it in a specific area, you develop that critical mass that starts to have synergy, starts to have an energy on its own, that people are drawn to arts and culture, pocket parks. That older structure are so much better for attractiveness than the modern, pole buildings that we see in some cities where they're putting up the tin sides. We need to save our history. We need to continue with the incentives. Great Places is another program that was started under Governor Vilsack in the Waterloo Cedar Falls area. It's been designated a great place, and you have to have a theme. It was our trails and water trail theme that connect our two cities together. So you also need recreational opportunities, and our trail systems are very important to that. So, what we were talking about and what the research really shows kind of bears out exactly what needs to happen in our communities. I found out that once you give those initial incentives and things start, your property values start going, you don't need them. Look at downtown Main Street, Cedar Falls. If a business fails down there for whatever reason, there's people lining up to move into that area, and they can get the financing because of the value of those property and the synergy that's going on in downtown Cedar Falls. Now, downtown Cedar Falls would fit into a small community by itself, but we're in a greater part, and those kind of things need to be done. And number one, we have to have high-speed internet hookup. And you talked about capital. Well, that's one of the things we've been working on in the Iowa legislature. We've been working with the Iowa Innovation Council, and I see Mark Petrov back there. Thank you, Mark, for coming. Who's a key player in this innovation economy. This last legislative session, we put a fund together, and they're going to have fund managers out there, and they're looking for Iowa-based projects that are innovative in nature, that have great potential to grow in Iowa, and there's going to be capital invested into those to be able to help stimulate those kind of things. So, government can play a major role in this stuff. And right now, I think there's a political race to make our constituents happy by saying, we're overtaxing you, and we're gonna hand, a $50 check back to you at the end of the year. I submit that we would be better off, and we would all benefit from it, if we took those dollars per person and invested them in our community, in the creative economy stuff, and help our community grow. And when you have high-paid workers living in high-density areas, those property taxes will help lower every individual's tax and property tax in the state. We don't want to I don't think we should get the cart before the horse and hand out those resources until we really compete in this war of talent. Every state in the union has the same problem we have. They're fighting for talented, creative, innovative workers. And if we don't invest in the creative economy concepts, we're going to fall behind. And Harvey Singelman, and I'll say this lastly, Harvey Singelman, who used to be former governor then, Terry Branstad, before he took a hiatus from the governor's office, was the state economist, and he had a principle that was called the Red Queen principle that he developed. And I asked him, I said, Harvey, what is the Red Queen principle? And he said, well, it's about Alice in Wonderland. When she went through the looking glass, it was down there, and she was in Wonderland, and everybody in that Wonderland was tearing around and going here and going there, and nobody's standing still. And Alice asked the Red Queen this, why is everybody running and so energized around here? And the Red Queen said, in this place, if you are not going at full speed and you are falling behind. And that's what we have to do here in Iowa. We're in a war for talent. We've got to compete. We need to invest in these creative economy concepts. And so in order for us to compete, we got to move forward. We can't stand still, fall behind.
Yeah, well, I fully agree, yes, with most of what's been said. Just pick up on a couple of themes. Jim said about retention of creative capital, of course. That's where smaller cities could have competitive advantage because, in terms of attractiveness, we may not necessarily play well compared to really large metropolitan areas, but in retention, we could. And so focus on retention is important, so making sure that our own creative capital already here does not disappear. And that's I think, a good example of how social capital, which your family, I guess, would assist in retaining creative individuals in the community. So retention is important. I mean, sometimes we talk about attracting and bringing new people, but which is important too, but even our own creative resources should not be drained. And that's, of course, it's a $1 million question. How? But as I said, there are certain endowments already in this community that could help doing that because of social capital. Critical mass is actually a very important question right now. And the academic side, we're trying to find what is the critical mass and how many creative individuals per capita we need to. Well, that's of course a joke, but creative mass, building creative mass is extremely important. And if we understand better what are the mechanisms of sort of launching the process when it becomes kind of snowball, that's of course will be very helpful. As I said, in smaller communities, we really may need just a number of projects, a number of individuals who would be engaged, and then it sort of trickles down to others and makes the community leap forward in terms of creative capital. So that's an important distinction, I guess, compared to, say, large metropolitan areas that are not very successful, Detroit, for instance, where this process is much more difficult to launch and to push to go. Another theme, of course, is very important for all of us is downtowns. Downtowns are critical places for creative capital, knowledge economy, right? So it relates both to demographics and also to the sort of interest of the group that we typically assign as creative capital, right? So it's spaces where we can both live, play, and work. That's the three things that we do in our lives, and that's what downtown represents. It's an attractive downtown. That's where people can see themselves doing those three things, and that's will be coming there. And of course, so interactions and if we pass. I mean, the knowledge economy itself, of course, is based on face-to-face interactions and communications, not just talking over Skype. It's still and by far and large, is the person-to-person, face-to-face economy, although you might think otherwise given the technological advances. So that in itself, the concentration of people in those areas in itself is a stimulus to knowledge production, which is important to realize as well. It's not just to make hip downtown to attract, but it also could have very real economic value in terms of building new knowledge economy and innovation, and as a result, products that are more competitive. So that's the few things I guess I could add. Of course, we all should remember as well that there are other sides of creative economy that might be not as attractive, and especially with some largely we experience related to, say, gentrification downtown, to displacement and other things. So all of this should be kind of looked at when we plan a city, when we plan a city for creative development. All look at these things collectively and make sure that everybody has some sort of participation in the benefits that creative economy brings. I think that's important things to remember.
I know everybody's getting worn out, so I'm just going to leave you with a few words, 3 words in fact: scale, focus, and momentum. In terms of building a cultural district, I've had to keep reminding people that we can't do everything at once. When people scatter their efforts throughout a county, everywhere, all places at the same, it doesn't work. You got to concentrate on an area, to select it, and move forward in that area. You also have to focus your efforts. You have to make sure that what you're doing is quality, that you're not scattering people's interest by having things there and events and programs that don't work and really should have been left on the cutting room floor. You have to be sure that you keep your momentum flowing. One of the problems we've had on the other side of the river in Waterloo is we've scattered efforts years apart. Someone will go to Herculean efforts to get a business downtown, and 2 years later that business is closed because nothing ever followed it. You've got to keep your momentum going. So it's scale, make sure you're doing the right size project for the community you're talking about. Focus, you're focused on an area both geographically and quality-wise, and your momentum keeps going. You do all those things and you get a chance of having a cultural and entertainment area or a area that attracts these workers that we all want to get to stay in Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and the ones we want to have move back here from wherever they move away to. Thanks for your interest today, and if you have any questions, I'm sure we'll all be glad to answer.
We do have a few minutes for questions.
From each of your perspectives, what role can the university play in terms of faculty, staff, and students to get involved in this process?
The university's doing fine. It's doing what it should do. Events like this, and we have some university folks who make the 9-mile trip to Waterloo, and I know a lot of them have to use their GPS to find it, but they still come to downtown Waterloo now and then. Particularly music departments come and done a few events down there, and we appreciate that. And studying the issue as we've done academically helps us. So the university is being supportive, and we appreciate that.
I guess I could say that almost every successful community in terms of creative capital in the Midwest, we're talking small ones, right, have either college or university attached to it. And of course, some of that is understanding, but on the other hand, even small college, even small liberal arts private college does make a difference because it makes it more attractive. Of course, it creates labor force that is potentially creative and students as well. So that's, of course, a very, very close connection. At a different level, of course, the university as a generator of ideas and innovation itself that will be implemented at the research parks and things like that. We don't really have that, and I actually would like to see it more. You and I become more of a sort of place from which ideas will trickle down to the community and be implemented in industry and other sectors of the economy. But yeah, we see very strong connection with success in attracting creative capital, retaining creative capital, and building on creative capital in the presence of an institution of higher learning.
I think the university is doing a great job, but we need to work, especially when you have, for example, our business community center, the work that they're doing with the development of entrepreneurial programs to make sure that they continue to connect with developers in our city and work, not just through the small business development centers, but we have the developer programs. Also connect with the Economic Development Authority in our area to make sure that there's opportunities there for some of these great ideas to find innovation capital. John Papajohn's name's on a lot of small business development centers around the state. John Papajohn told me one time that he finds that there's plenty of innovation capital available in Iowa. The real problem is there's not a lot of great projects. And, I think a lot of that has changed over the last 10 years. I would say that there's probably more great projects than there is capital available. But it's out there, and we got to do a better job of connecting with that. And I think the university also needs to help sell our community also. You spend 4 years here, or if you go on to a master's program or even a doctorate here, this community has a lot going for it. There's a lot of pluses in the Waterloo Cedar Falls area, and our community's getting better all the time. And I would hope that young professionals see those opportunities, and we're going to work to try to help connect those students and graduates into what's going to be a really evolving, great community, and it's continuing to move forward, and the students are helping making it that.
Thank you. One very quick question.
I know that we always said that we would be more purchasing paid for people, but even that I know that a lot of the times people may not get a job because a lot of companies are not willing to give them that sort of job. So how do you handle that?
You're having trouble with, I had difficulty hearing because of the buzzing that's going in here, but people, the international background have difficulty connecting with jobs in the community. Can you, I missed a little bit of that.
Yes. So a lot of my, all the companies actually have complaints that they can't get a job over here because not that they're not qualified for the job, but because the companies are not willing to do the paperwork, that's what's wrong with that.
Oh, okay, all right. That's been a real problem as far as the work visas and demand occupations, and I think on the federal level, I've had that happen where we've had very talented people who wanted to work here that were students, and their work visas weren't considered one of those key demand occupations, being able to, that there was a tremendous shortage in. And I think it's really working through our Economic Development Authority also tries to help work with that, and we need to do more on the federal level in order to open that up. And I think there's been more dialogue. You know, Iowa has a history of kind of being, you know, a milquetoast type state. A lot of white people, and people are against the diversity in Iowa. And over the last decade, you've seen a change. I've seen a tremendous change, and one of Richard Florida's concepts of creative economy is that you need to be welcoming, and we need to make sure that people from foreign backgrounds are welcome in your community because they add to the diversity in culture and food and music and all the other things that there's so many benefits from. So that visa thing is something that we need to continue to work on and press our congressional delegation to do more to open that up.
I think it's a paperwork problem that we're not familiar with here, so we don't appreciate how hard it is to hire someone from a different country. We've got every color you can imagine in downtown Waterloo right now. So it's not color, it's we don't understand the process. And that, I think, is what the senator's talking about. We need to find a way to educate people how to do that.
We are out of time. Please help me thank our panelists. Thank you.